Friday the 13th, The Carnival, Chapter 13, Fortune Telling. As he threw up for a second time, Greg wasn't feeling particularly lucky. He was more lucky than he knew, because the cars had gone into their second loop-the-loop. So instead of Mitch's axe burying itself deep into the back of Greg's skull, it slashed down into the track. There was a loud crack, followed by a horrible sizzling. The chain of cars spun through the loop really fast, raced partway up the next hill, then slid back and coasted to a halt. Greg sat stunned. Then he smelled smoke. There were shouts from below. He looked down. He could barely make sense of what he was seeing. It was the carny worker who ran the coaster. He was waving. "Stay where you are!" Where was he gonna go? Greg waited, his heart pounding, his breathing ever so slowly returning to normal. Then he thought to wipe his mouth against the sleeve of his t-shirt, and he felt the wetness there. When he looked down and saw the circle of white and yellow crud on his chest, he almost threw up for a third time. The carny was clambering toward him, making his way up the track and easily as a monkey. When the carny reached him, Greg found no comfort in the man's large, scowling face. "You okay?" The question was gruff, as if the ride's malfunction were somehow Greg's fault. "I think so." "Come on," the carny said, unsnapping the safety bar and holding out a large, hairy hand. "I'll walk you down." The lights on the monster had shorted out, leaving only occasional crackling sparks. That meant the ride was dark. Thanks to the darkness, neither Greg nor the carny noticed Mitch as he climbed quickly down the other side of the ride. He jumped down into the grass and disappeared into the shadows. As soon as he was back on solid ground, Greg felt another wave of nausea and dizziness wash over him. But the carny had a firm grip on his arm, holding him upright. The burly man handed him a dirty yellow rag, which he plucked off the floor of the control booth. "Here," he ordered, "wipe yourself up." While Greg wiped the vomit from his shirt, the carny looked back in the booth. This time he came out with several strings of ride tickets. "Here you go, kid," the worker said. "Have yourself a blast. I gotta see if I can figure out what the hell is wrong with this thing." The carny gave him a rough push toward the exit, and Greg wandered off in a semi-daze. As the ride spun out of control, Greg had comforted himself with the promise that once he was on the ground again, he'd head straight home. But now, he stared at the free ride tickets in his hand. Maxie drove fast, and in less than half an hour they were whipping through the dark, deserted streets of Crystal Lake. 5 minutes later, the paved roads became bumpy dirt roads that jolted them deep into the heart of the forest. Maxie knew the way with her eyes closed, almost, but the thing was she couldn't have gotten lost if she tried. Almost every 50 yards there were signs for the carnival stapled to the trees. "Doesn't seem like there's much traffic headed out here," observed Graham, who was sitting in the back seat with Wendy. Even though Maxie wasn't really interested in Mr. Newton, it was still a heady feeling having the teacher ride with them, as if they had kidnapped him or something. She glanced at him in the rear view, and he smiled back. The look in his eye seemed to say she was the only one in the car. "That's because most people aren't crazy enough to come out here," Maxie said. "Right, Wendy?" "Right." Oh, yes," Graham said, grinning. "I forgot the place is haunted." "Worse than that," said Maxie with solemn pride. "They say Crystal Lake is the Devil's Gateway." "Oh my," Graham said. "You better believe it," Maxie replied. She wished she could scare the daylights out of him, or at least wipe that wolfish grin off his face. "They say that if you dig down deep enough anywhere around here, the invisible vapor starts seeping up out of the ground." She took one hand off the wheel and waggled her fingers to indicate fumes. "The vapor turns you meaner and nastier the longer you breathe it in." "Sort of like secondary smoke, I suppose," joked Graham. Maxie smiled. So did KC. Wendy guffawed. She'd been laughing way too hard at everything Graham said the whole trip, but this time she laughed so hard she snorted. She covered her face with her hands. And, Maxie said, if you dig down even deeper, the worst creatures of hell can get loose and come up for a little visit, like Jason Voorhees. He's visited these parts plenty of times. Okay, Casey pleaded. That's enough. I'm getting the willies. Yeah, Wendy agreed. I'm scared enough of carnivals without... Look! Maxie jammed on the brakes. Standing right in the middle of the dirt road, waving a big flashlight, was this tough-looking greaser in an orange reflector safety vest. He was waving Maxie's car to the left, where a bunch of other cars had parked in a grassy clearing in the woods. As she parked, Maxie glanced over at KC. She was looking paralyzed again. Maxie caught her eye and indicated with a shake of her head that KC should say something to Graham. KC shook her head slightly to indicate that she couldn't, but Maxie widened her eyes in a silent command. So, KC said to Graham, sounding overly sweet and about 6 years old, you've never told us how you ended up living here in Massachusetts. What are you talking about? Cried Wendy. He told us that the second day of class. Maxie shook her head. The girl was hopeless. Maxie was the last one out of the car. As she slammed her door, she spotted Wendy's camera lying on the back seat. Alicia Pendaflex in a tan leather case. Wendy had taken up photography about a month ago. She claimed it was because she was feeling artistic, but Maxie knew it was just another one of Wendy's hopeless ploys for meeting guys. It had not worked. Wendy was as boyfriendless as ever. Then again, Wendy never remembered to take any pictures. On an impulse, Maxie retrieved the camera, looped the strap around her long, thin neck, and followed her friends. As they trampled across the field toward the carnival, they started hearing organ grinder music, screams, and shouts. Maxie was surprised. She thought she was too old for fairs, so why was she getting so excited? They trudged up a dirt road lined on both sides with thick, dark masses of bushes and trees. The beautiful pine smell of the woods was mingling now with the cheap, cloying smells of cotton candy and caramel corn. Then they turned the corner, and there it was. The brightly lit carnival loomed ahead of them, like the magic land of Oz. Casey gasped, then clapped her hands together and jumped up and down. Oh, how beautiful! Grow up! Sneered Maxie. They walked up to the entrance gate. They were stopped by a burly clown who demanded $5 each. Oh, come on, Maxie said. You're not going to charge us full price. How much time is left for tonight anyway? The fair's open till midnight, the clown growled. That's when the fireworks start. So we missed half already? That's not my fault. No discounts. Hey, it doesn't look like you've got crowds of people dying to get in here, Maxie said. Let us in for half price, or you lose out on 4 customers. Maxie, please, Casey pleaded, fishing through her wallet for a 5. Don't be rude. I'm not being rude, but it's almost 10 o'clock already, and they... Graham said, I'll pay. He handed over a 20. Maxie shook her head. She could have gotten them in for 10. She was sure of it. She went through the turnstile fast. The clown harshly gripped her hand and stamped it with a tiny black Ferris wheel. That's so you can get back in if you go out, he explained sourly. Then came Graham, then Casey, and then Wendy. As each person pushed through the turnstile, the metal arm turned full circle and clicked. They were in. Selena sat on the plush chair behind the star-covered curtain in the rear of the fortune-telling booth, fidgeting nervously. Mr. Fantana had promised to come by with news of how her mother was feeling. But so far, no Fantana. She checked her watch. 10 after 10. She'd had so few customers. There was no way she was waiting around any longer. She decided even though Fantana had threatened to fire her mother if Selena left her post. The truth was, carnies were always leaving the fair every chance they got. If a worker developed a love interest or any kind of job in town that they passed through, it was almost a sure bet that that worker would ditch the fair. Fantana was always struggling to hold on to his crew. He would never fire her mother, Selena realized. She'd been stupid to worry about his threats. She jumped up and started out the door of the booth. She almost collided with Mr. Fantana. He was grinning at her, but in the meanest possible way. "Leaving?" No, she stammered. "I just thought it, might help if I waited outside, to attract the customers." "Uh-huh." He kept smiling at her, his pig eyes twinkling, as if to say, "We both know you're lying." "Anyway," he said, "I only have a second, but I just came by to tell you that your mama's fine." A large smile of relief burst across Selena's face. "She is?" "Uh-huh. I stopped by the infirmary, and she was on her way over here. I had a hell of a time convincing her to stay there and rest." That sounded like her mother, all right. Selena's feeling of relief deepened. "I told her you'd watch the booth till midnight. Then you can go see her," Fantana said. He turned to leave. He stopped short. Vince Fantana was staring at one of the most beautiful girls he'd ever seen in his life, and he'd seen plenty. This one was tall, with long, dark hair. She was making her way toward the fortune-telling booth. She had some friends straggling along behind her, a dumpy little redhead, a pretty blonde, and some older guy. But the girl, Vince had trouble taking his eyes off of her. He turned back and flashed Selena an oily grin. "Looks like you've got some business," he told her. "Don't blow it." "This is such a waste of money," complained Wendy as they stopped outside the fortune teller's booth. "Really, Maxie, you can't tell me you believe in this nonsense." "I believe in this nonsense," Maxie told her levelly. She had her back to Graham, so she gave Wendy her rat face. When they were all 10, this face used to drive Wendy and Casey wild. The two girls would scream and beg her not to make the rat face. This time, Wendy only rolled her eyes. Maxie turned and ducked into the booth. A cowboyish old man was just coming out. He had yellowish, swept-back hair and awful little eyes. He gave Maxie a big grin and said, "Evening." Then he slid by her, bringing their bodies close together. Gross. The fortune-telling booth was small, with a couple of white plastic chairs set right on the grassy ground. All around the booth, on ledges and shelves, sat burning candles, silver zodiac signs, and other occult paraphernalia. In back, there was a curtain with 2 more chairs, both plush. There was a teenager sitting in one of the chairs, her dark face half obscured by the starry curtain. Maxie stopped short when she saw how young the girl was. She'd been expecting someone a lot older. Getting a palm or tarot reading from some kid did seem dumb, just like Wendy had said. Maxie had a sudden impulse to push everyone back out of the booth. But it was too late. The young girl was coming out from behind the curtain. "Can I help you?" she said. Maxie shuddered. The girl was staring straight at her. Maxie couldn't take her eyes off of her. It wasn't that she knew her. Somehow, deep in her bones, she felt as if this girl was her, as if she was looking into a full-length mirror, which was odd, because there really was no physical resemblance between the two of them. "Help us? Probably not," Wendy answered. She gave Maxie a pleading look. "Come on, Maxie." Maxie still had her eyes on the girl and said, "I wanted to know if I could get a group fortune-telling. A tarot reading, but for all of us at once." The girl smiled. "A bargain hunter, eh?" Maxie searched for sarcasm in the girl's face, but there was none. "Hey, maybe she is psychic," Wendy said to Maxie. "You are always looking for bargains, or just stealing the stuff." "Shut up." Girls, Graham said. "A little decorum, after all. We are in a mystic presence." "Aren't you kind of young to be doing fortunes?" Wendy asked. The girl laughed. "Yeah, I guess I am. I'm kind of filling in for my mom tonight." "Do you live with the carnival?" Casey asked wide-eyed. She shook her head. "I only travel with the carnival in the summers. The rest of the time I'm in school just like you guys. We're in school all the time, Wendy said. Maxie said, Guys, she's supposed to answer questions about us, okay? Graham had already gotten his wallet out. The teacher was really eager to spend money on them, now wasn't he? Maxie didn't need a fortune teller to tell her what that was about. Another horny old man. Graham handed $5 to Selena, who looked at Maxie for approval before she took it. Maxie nodded. Okay, the girl said. Let's get started. First of all, my name's Selena. And you are? Everyone said their name in turn. Then Selena held open the curtain. Why don't you all step back here? There wasn't much room, just 2 chairs with a small table in between. Next to one of the chairs was a back door, which was slightly ajar. Selena told Maxie to sit. Selena sat as well. Again, Maxie found herself staring. She couldn't help smiling. Selena spread a silk scarf over the table with a gentle flourish. Then she handed Maxie a well-worn pack of tarot cards and told her to shuffle them. Now hold the cards in both hands, she instructed, and speak your question aloud. Maxie held the cards as she tried to think of a question. Graham and her friends had positioned themselves right behind her, which was making it kind of hard for her to think. She wanted to ask if her mom would ever stop drinking and a few other questions, but she would need a private session for that, and ask her when we can leave this lousy carnival, Wendy suggested. Wins, Casey said. You're going to offend her. No, you won't, Selena said easily. But if you don't let your friends concentrate, it could mess up the reading. Oh, yeah, sure, Wendy said, but she didn't say another word. Maxie twisted her head and glanced up at Graham, who was smiling down at her. Right then, she had a psychic prediction of her own. If Graham got her alone tonight, he was going to blubber on about how much he loved her. She turned back to Selena. Okay, I guess I just want to ask what the future holds for, all of us. Your whole group. Yeah. Whew, Graham said. I was afraid you were going to ask what your grades will be. Casey and Wendy both laughed, but Maxie kept her eyes on Selena. Suddenly, she felt afraid, which was weird because the truth was she didn't really believe in psychics. But right then, she felt as if this girl might really be able to see her future. Then the dark-skinned girl took the pack of cards from Maxie and started laying them out one at a time, gently turning each card as if she were turning the pages of a sacred book. The cards looked so old and beautiful, too, with their odd colorful figures. As she turned the cards, Selena recited the names of the cards out loud. 3 of Cups, 2 of Wands, the Tower. She positioned the cards in 3 rows with every other card horizontal. When she was laying out the center card of the center row, her hand jumped slightly. For the first time since she started putting out the cards, her eyes met Maxie's. Maxie looked down at the card that Selena had just turned. It showed a figure in a dark cape riding a horse. The figure's face was only partly visible. It was a skull. It's the death card, Selena said softly. She went back to dealing, and when the cards were all laid out, she smiled at Maxie. Well, she said brightly, too brightly, Maxie thought, I see very good things. You do? Yes. Why do you sound so surprised, Maxie? Asked Graham with a chuckle behind her. He put his hand on her shoulder. Of course she sees good things. We're good people. Besides, it's great for business, Wendy joked. First of all, Selena continued, you're all going to have long lives. More bad news, Wendy said. Both Casey and Wendy started giggling. Selena went on, seemingly undisturbed. Mostly what I see is about you, she told Maxie, because you were holding the cards. Understand? She was really turning up the psychic character now. Yeah? I see that you have a lot of doubt in your heart, that you're not a true believer. I also see a lot of pain in your past. Someone has done something to hurt you. That's amazing, Casey gushed, suddenly serious. That's so true, Maxie. She's reading your mind. Casey, Wendy said, how lame-brained can you get? Everything she says could apply to anyone in the whole... I see that it's your father who has hurt you the most, Selena said, peering down at the cards. There was a different kind of silence in the booth now. Selena was looking at Maxie intently. Maxie felt like the girl could see inside of her, into her heart. That she could see the tremendous love she'd felt for her handsome, charming father when she was little. See the intense feeling of abandonment both she and her mom experienced as Mr. Wagner started to work longer and longer hours. He always said he was doing it for all of them, but... You have to let the pain go, Selena intoned. I've had pain like that myself. She paused, looking shy. Maxie nodded for her to go on. My father was a carny worker. He got my mom pregnant, then ran off and left her. I've never even met him. When I was growing up, my mother always used to tell me that we had to forgive him and forget him. Otherwise, she said, the bitterness would ruin our lives. I think I was able to do that, to let him go. But my mom could not, and it's like her own prediction has come true on herself. Do you understand? Maxie nodded slowly, mesmerized. Okay, Selena said with a soft smile. That's it, I guess. She smiled broadly, breaking the spell. I hope you feel like you got your money's worth. Wait, Maxie said as Selena started to rise. What about... She pointed at the center of the spread of cards, where the death card lay. Selena smiled again. That can mean a lot of things. For one thing, the death card often stands for transformation. Something needs to die inside of you for you to be reborn. That something, I believe, is your anger at your father. Understand? Maxie nodded, but she had the uncomfortable feeling that the girl was lying. Chapter 14, Truth or Dare. That is so amazing, Casey said as they came out of the booth. And you said it was made up. She cuffed Wendy's shoulder. It was totally made up, Wendy said. Oh, come on. How can you say that? They were strolling past the bumper cars where kids were smacking into each other at alarming speeds. I mean, she knew all about Maxie's father, Casey said. What about Maxie's father? Graham asked, smiling, as usual, right at Maxie. Nothing, Maxie said, her heart starting to pound. She eyed her friends. Nothing I'm going to tell Graham about anyway. Say, Maxie, Wendy taunted. How about a little game of truth or dare? Maxie had never backed down from a dare in her life. She wasn't going to start now. Go ahead, she said lightly. Cotton candy, sang a vendor strolling toward them. Maxie kept her eyes locked on Wendy. I said go ahead. Hold it, Graham said. He had his wallet out again. He was buying 3 cotton candies. As he handed around the pink blobs of spun sugar, Wendy said, Okay, my question is... Remember, Maxie interrupted, it's going to be my turn next. So watch what you say. Wendy grinned mischievously. My question is, why have you been so angry at your father lately? And the dare is, you have to strip buck naked and streak the carnival. You're really asking for it tonight, aren't you? Wendy shrugged. Truth or dare, your choice. Maxie handed her cotton candy to Graham. Hold this a second. Crossing her hands, she reached down and started to pull her gray t-shirt right over her head. Graham's jaw dropped. Casey's eyes bulged. Wendy couldn't believe what she was seeing. Maxie got the shirt about halfway off when she remembered 2 things. One, she still had Wendy's camera around her neck, and it was getting tangled in her t-shirt. Two, she wasn't wearing a bra. But neither of these things was the reason she let the t-shirt drop back down. The problem was, if Maxie stripped, Wendy would feel like she had won the game. Because Wendy knew that running around the carnival naked was going to be less embarrassing for Maxie than answering that question. So Maxie turned to face Graham. "Here's the truth," she told her teacher. "My dad is cheating on my mom." Maxie was right. Wendy looked more shocked than when Maxie had started to strip. She forced herself to go on. The words burned like acid in her mouth. "He's been having this affair with his business partner for over a year. Her name is Beverly. She's this really waspy woman with long red hair and one of those jaws that always looks like it's wired shut. Everyone in town has seen them together and has been talking about it, and it really kills me." Graham was frowning. "Wow," he said. "That's pretty heavy. I'm sorry, Maxie." "Don't worry about it." She tossed her hair, turned to Wendy, and in a sing-song voice said, "My turn." Panic flickered in Wendy's eyes. It was a familiar and pleasing sight. "Truth or dare," Maxie said. "Did you tell Casey that—" "Maxie," Wendy begged. "Let's stop. I don't—" "Did you tell Casey that you've got a wicked crush on Graham? You said you'd pay all the money you own just to sleep with him for one night. True?" Tears formed instantly in Wendy's eyes, as if Maxie had slapped her, which in a way she had. Good, she thought as Wendy lowered her head. "I'll make my dare real easy, not like you did," Maxie added, turning to look around at the carnival. "Let's see. All you have to do is ride," she pointed, "that roller coaster and not hold on to the safety bar." She smiled triumphantly. "Well, which is it? Truth or dare?" Wendy chose the third option. She turned and ran. Maxie laughed as the short redhead disappeared into the large, dark fairgrounds. "Go ahead and run, coward," she yelled after her. "That was mean," Casey said. "A lot less mean than what she did to me." Her hands behind her back, Maxie leaned against the counter of a locked game and smiled insolently back at Casey and Graham. Standing in the shadows just a few yards behind her, Mitch Deaver smiled as well. Though his leering grin was hidden behind his white mask, he was pressed into the narrow grassy strip between two booths. He was ready to strike. "You know," Graham said, "I think I'm beginning to understand how this truth or dare business works." "You like it?" Maxie asked. "Not much, no." Mitch carefully pulled out his switchblade. He clicked open the blade. "We better go after her," Casey said. "Nah," Maxie said. "Let her stew. You know Wendy. She just needs to sulk for a few years and she'll snap right out of it. Besides, I've got her camera." She pulled on the strap, trying to get the rough leather off her neck. It kept tightening like a noose. "Look at that sexy beauty," thought Mitch. "Isn't she sweet? She's baring her neck for me to slash it." "That's very empathetic of you," Graham said. "Huh? That means you're being caring," he explained. "You can go running after her if you like," she shot back. "After all, you're our teacher." She put an extra spin on the last word, trying to jab him with it. He got the point. He reddened and looked away. "Well, maybe if we wait, she'll come right back," he mumbled. It was as if Mitch's body and his mind were working independently. His arm slowly raised the knife over his head, but his brain kept admiring the tall girl's stunning figure. He was drooling into his mask. Maxie pushed off the wall of the booth. "There's no point waiting. She's not coming back so fast." She took her cotton candy back from Graham and took a big bite, the sugar dissolving instantly in her mouth. It was so sweet she wanted to retch. She looked around for a trash can to throw the stuff away. She didn't find a trash can. Instead, she spotted an intensely familiar figure on the other side of the fairgrounds. A tall man with dark hair. He was just disappearing into the cyclotron. And next to him she saw a flash of coppery red hair, glinting in the fair's night lights. Oh God, it couldn't be. She felt faint. Just then Mitch overcame his confusion. With a low moan, he stepped out of the shadows. Chapter 15. The Figure in the Darkness. At the same moment, Maxie dropped the cotton candy on the ground. She started to run. It was awkward running with the camera around her neck, but that was the least of Maxie's problems. The carnival had seemed deserted. That is, until she tried to race through the fairgrounds. Suddenly, there were plenty of people in her way. She almost collided with the soda vendor, then a tall man on stilts, then someone in a big blue Sonic the Hedgehog suit. The carny worker at the cyclotron was just locking the entrance gate as she came running up. "Let me in!" she cried breathlessly, trying to push her way forward. The carny was strong, and one hand on her shoulder was more than enough to hold her back. He glared at her, then stuck out his other hand. "5 ride tickets." She stared at him uncomprehendingly, then slapped her pockets. "Damn it, my friends have my tickets." She turned, staring back the way she had come. She couldn't even see them yet. Then, in the distance, she waved frantically. "You'll have to wait," the carny told her, heading for the ride. "Just let me on. They'll pay you the tickets as soon as... Hey!" Without bothering to answer, the carny worker climbed inside the cyclotron. He closed the hatch behind him, and she heard metal bolts sliding into place. The cyclotron was a large ride designed to look like a spaceship. As it started to spin, the whole thing lit up in garish greens and reds and yellows. It did everything but take off into the night sky. Maxie started to pace. She was still out of breath, and now that she had stopped running, she could feel the waves of heat rising inside of her. The waves crested and washed out her pores as sweat. "I can't believe it," she kept shouting at herself. Of course she had known about the affair for over a year, but running into them? It seemed like the ultimate betrayal. From inside the cyclotron, there were screams. "They're in there," she told Casey as her friend jogged up. Graham wasn't far behind. "My father," she explained, "and that... She couldn't find the right word to describe how she felt about Beverly. "Are you sure?" Casey asked. "Yeah, I'm sure." Maxie stared at the spinning ride like a cat eyeing a hole a mouse had disappeared into. If she could have, at that moment, she would have torn her dad to pieces. While she watched the ride, a figure hidden in darkness watched Maxie. "Maxie," Graham said, "maybe we shouldn't hang here. I mean, maybe this is the kind of thing you'd be better off talking to your father about in pri—" She pulled her arm free. She kept staring at the ride, waiting. The figure in the shadows was waiting as well, waiting until the small knot of passerby wandered past the cyclotron and out of his way. Then the figure started forward, moving quickly. "You know, Maxie, we were far away," Casey said. "It might not have been your dad at all." "It was him," Maxie insisted, "and her." Maxie, Casey, and Graham kept staring at the spinning cyclotron as if hypnotized, which meant that no one saw the figure approach. No one even knew he was there until his hands closed around Maxie's throat. Chapter 16. Haunted House. "Greg!" Maxie said. Her face broke into a happy smile. It surprised her how glad she was to see him. Greg was grinning back. His freckly skin looked paler than usual and a little green. "Hey, you okay?" she asked. "Wow, you look like you've been through a food processor." "I have," he said ruefully. "First, I got whiplash on the bumper cars. Then the roller coaster shorted out and nearly killed me. Casey gave an exaggerated gasp, mostly, Maxie figured, as an excuse to put her arm around his shoulders. That's horrible, she exclaimed. Greg gently removed her arm. He turned to Graham and stared, not even saying hello. So perhaps these carnival rides are a little too scary after all, eh? Greg told him, eyes twinkling. Greg didn't smile at Graham, as Graham bantered on. The way he was glaring, Maxie thought he might charge the teacher and fight him right then and there. She didn't care. All she could think about was her father. Hey, Maxie, Casey said. The ride stopped. She whirled. Casey was right. The ride had stopped. The lights were off, and the carny worker was coming out. He left the metal hatch open, but no one came out after him. He walked toward them. Okay, step right up and experience the world's fastest salad spinner. It'll dry your lettuce, fry your brains, and anyone who thinks they can ride it twice in a row rides the second time for free, courtesy of yours truly. Now step right up. The big spill seemed to be a little silly since the only customers were Maxie and her friends. The carny held out his hands. Tickets, please? But where is everybody? Maxie stammered. The carny looked puzzled. Oh, you mean the folks on the ride? We let our riders out the back. The back? Maxie raced around the side of the cyclotron. Metal gates led away from the back exit, leading the riders back to the fairgrounds. There was no one in sight. She groaned with frustration. She had lost them. When she came back around to the front, Graham took her arm. Come on, Maxie, he said. He started leading her toward a game booth. It's time to take your mind off of your troubles. I'm going to win you a stuffed bear. Just a sec, Maxie said. She didn't like him touching her. She pulled free, turning to look back at her friends. Greg and KC were both staring at her. The way they were looking, she knew she wasn't the only one who was feeling upset. Go ahead, I'll catch up, she told her teacher. Hands in her pockets, head down, she loped over to KC and Greg. What's the matter? She asked Greg in a low voice. What are you so mad about? Greg didn't answer. Don't forget, he's faculty, she said. He could flunk us. What's he doing here? His car broke down, Maxie answered. We ran into him and gave him a lift. She kept looking around the nearby booths, hoping and not hoping to catch sight of her dad. Maybe it wasn't them. She forced her concentration back on Greg. He shouldn't be hanging out with you guys, he said. It's not right. He could get fired for that, you know. First of all, Maxie said, glancing quickly at KC, he's not hanging out with me. He's hanging out with me and KC and Wendy, okay? And second of all, chill. He's just along for the ride, no biggie. Greg searched her face. She tried to look reassuring, as opposed to totally angry and frazzled, which was how she felt. It didn't seem to help. Finally, Greg turned and stalked toward the booth where Graham was standing. I'm going to whip his ass on that game, he called back to Maxie. You watch. I'm the one who's going to win you a stuffed animal. Go for it, Maxie said, forcing a grin. Then she looked at KC. There was a haunted look in the girl's pale green eyes. She was close to tears. Now what's wrong? Maxie asked sullenly. Didn't you hear what he said? He said he's going to win a doll for you. So? Come on, let's go watch. He'll win for you too. The stone of disappointment had rolled back into place in Maxie's gut. After seeing her dad with Bev, it felt more like a boulder. KC did not move. I can't believe it. He bums $20 from me so he can win a doll for you? KC. Casey's hands were clenching and unclenching at her sides. Maxie, I don't care about Greg. It's Graham that really... KC, don't start, Maxie said. I mean, cut me some slack, okay? We've already got Wendy acting nuts, and my own father... She had to pause to get the choke sound out of her voice. My father's screwing around right in front of my eyes. I mean, I've got more than I can handle right. You lied to me, Casey said flatly. What? You did. You lied, like you always do. Maxie glanced back at the game booth where Graham and Greg stood side by side, throwing darts at a row of tiny balloons. They stopped throwing. They had lost. They both slapped down more money. Casey, she said, trying and failing to keep her impatience out of her voice, you're making a whole big thing out of nothing. What difference does it make what he said? It was just... No, Maxie. Why don't you flirt with him, you said. But you knew all along, didn't you? You knew! You knew he liked you, just like... Her voice caught. Just like they all do. And you enjoy it. You keep stealing them away. Anyone that I'm interested in. Casey, you know that's not true. Though actually, thought Maxie, it was true. Look, I mean, I can't help it if... It was an old argument, and Maxie knew from long experience that the line she was about to use was a bad one. She stopped herself, but not in time. Casey glared at her. You can't help it if they all like you better than they like me. That's what you were going to say, wasn't it? Wasn't it? Well, I can help it, okay? All I have to do is never hang out with you again. Casey! Maxie grabbed Casey's hand, but she angrily yanked it free and stormed off into the fairgrounds. Maxie sighed. 2 down. Graham shouted, and she turned. Her teacher was holding up a tiny doll. It looked like a skunk, and was waving happily at her, signaling for her to come over. Greg looked furious. He wasn't holding up any doll. Maxie motioned that she would be there in a second. Then she turned and jogged after Casey. But Casey saw her coming and ran even faster. She had her head down, in a way that told Maxie she was crying. Maxie slowed to a halt. To hell with her. Let her cry. It was turning into some awful night. The operator at the House of Death sullenly watched the pretty blonde teenager hurrying toward him. He was in the middle of a pleasant daydream and in no mood for interruptions. He didn't get up until the girl was standing right in front of him. She appeared to be in a big hurry, too, as if all of a sudden she just had to go through the funhouse. Grunting, he stood. The teenager had her head down. She was crying. Little silent sobs. She kept biting her lip, too, trying to keep the sound in, and her nose was red. Well, the carny had troubles of his own. He had no sympathy for bawling teeny boppers. Without looking up and without even bothering to count, the girl handed him a long strip of ride tickets. The tickets were hot and moist. What'd you do, blow your nose with these things? He asked. He laughed. She didn't. He ripped off 6 tickets and tried to hand the rest back to her, but she was already hurrying past him and taking her place in the front car. He shrugged. He latched her safety bar, pulling on the bar once to double-check that the girl was locked in and that she'd stay locked in throughout the ride. Then he walked back to the booth. He threw the lever. The girl's car started forward. She had paid to go through the House of Death, and through the House of Death she would go. The blonde girl still had her head down as her car pushed slowly through the first set of wooden doors. Then she was gone. Right away, the carny sat down again. He went back to daydreaming about how someday soon, like tomorrow, he would quit the Fantana Traveling Funhouse and Carnival and make a fortune by... Damn! He couldn't remember how he was going to make his fortune. The boys shouting ruined his daydream altogether. He gazed off in the direction of the tilt-a-whirl. The cars looked like they were spinning and tilting faster than usual. Only the boy was riding, but he was shouting his head off. The carny chuckled. Stu must be taking out his frustrations on the young rider. Well, he had plenty of frustrations of his own to worry about. Bang, bang, bang! The black shutters of the haunted house kept rhythmically knocking right above the carny's head. No wonder he always had such a ripping headache. There was no sound from within the haunted house, though. Not a peep of that blonde. No surprise, the carny thought. It was a lousy ride. Then he heard the screams. They were piercing screams, each cry a high-pitched shout that seemed to stab the air. The carny's eyebrows rose in surprise. He stroked his mustache. Those screams had sounded awfully genuine. Usually the kiddies who were unfortunate enough to waste their ride tickets on the haunted house screamed just for the fun of it, and their screams sounded forced, but this... The girl inside the funhouse stopped screaming as abruptly as she had started. Then she started again, crying out even more desperately this time. The carny thought he heard her yelling, "Oh God, no!" He grinned as he realized what was going on. Mitch! The mechanic must have snuck into the Chamber of Horrors again. That was the only thing that could make the girl scream like that. Good for Mitch. Fantana had threatened to fire him the last time he pulled that stunt, but Mitch was tough. He did whatever. There was a sudden wrenching sound from the tilt-a-whirl and... Good God! It looked like a whole car had dislodged from the tracks. The boy's body was flying through the hot night air. The boy did a perfect swan dive, except he landed on his head on a rock-hard ground. For a second there was utter silence, and the carny wondered if he had really seen what he thought he'd seen. Then there were shouts as several carnies started running toward the accident. The funhouse operator started running as well. He arrived just as Vince Fantana drove up in his small brown minivan, which he used to get around the fair quickly. Someone had already thrown a blanket over the boy. The carny tried not to look. "Get him in the van!" Fantana was ordering in a low voice. "You, Mike, get him to the hospital. Stu, get some guys to help you get that broken tilt-a-whirl car out of sight. Just put up a closed for repairs sign and get back to work. Not a word about this to anyone. Understood?" And a few minutes after that, the boy and the van were gone, vanished, as if they'd never existed. Meanwhile, back at the unattended funhouse, Casey's car had pushed out through the double doors in back. The young girl lay slumped over her seat. Only, her head was now missing. Okay, folks, this has been chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16 of Friday the 13th, The Carnival. And I got to admit I'm a little disappointed that Casey died, because I thought she was the most genuine, nice person out of that group of characters. Her and Greg, anyways. Graham, Maxie, and Wendy can bite the dust for all I care at this point. But yeah, I was sad that Casey is gone, but I was also disappointed that her death happened off screen. I'm guessing that guillotine that someone dislodged after Mitch fixed it or whatever, or after the carny fixed it, is what did her in. Maybe we'll find out more details in a bit. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought of tonight's upload, and we've only got a couple more to go before this book is finished. It looks like the shit is hitting the proverbial fan now at the carnival, and things are starting to get interesting. So let's see how it goes. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and stay away from this carnival, because...
It's got a death! Ouch, 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 ouch. Stop it! Come on, stop it. Back. Bad mask, bad mask. Hey! This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morse, and you are listening to 80s Slasher Librarian's narration of my book, Friday the 13th Carnival.